Hello everyone. So we're going to do another book review. So I've actually written this one. All right. So it's not really a review. It's more a sort of explanation of what it is. So as you can see, it's how to design adventure games. Okay. So there's a little not for sale sign across the middle of it. That's because it's a test book. My last test book I got before it got published. So ignore that little bit there. It's not got that on the other copies that you buy from the shops. Right, so why did I want to write a book about how to design adventure games? Well, simple really. So I write guidebooks as well, and I've written three massive, absolutely massive guidebooks about pretty much every adventure game written for the ZX Spectrum. Um, I must have reviewed about 950 games easily across those, from 82 all the way up to 1990. And when you play that many games, you start to realise all the problems that you can come across when you're playing a game. So those would be it's basically a book on not only how to design games but how to avoid doing bad games. And a little bit about myself. So I started off actually in adventure games. I used to develop games myself as an artist and designer. Okay. The very first games I ever worked on were things like Excalibur, Sword of Kings, which got published by Alternative Software, Alien Research Centre, and Hit, which both got released by Zenobi. That was at a point where adventure games were sort of dying out a little bit, text-based adventure games. So I do have a bit of knowledge about how to go about designing these things. I later on worked on sort of more mainstream games. I went to work on things for Ocean, Gremlin Graphics, Gremlin Interactive as it was called at the time, Sales Curve Interactive, Atari, Activision. I've been around a bit and I've designed a lot of games and I sort of know where I'm coming from. I've also worked as a lecturer at Teesside University doing not only 3D art training for the students but game design courses as well. So I've got a bit of practical knowledge and a bit of knowledge of teaching. So this book is not about programming. I want to just make that clear. Okay, it's just about designing games. And normally, as you're probably aware, you get the design stage and then you get the implementation stage where you actually code the thing. This is just purely the design stage, and it takes you through pretty much everything you need to know from a complete novice point of view. So when I say adventure games, by the way, I don't mean the point-and-click ones. These are the verb-noun ones where you type in things like go north, go south, get key, unlock door, open door. Later on, adventure games had a bit more sophisticated, what's called a parser, the bit that learns and deciphers what you're typing in and turns that into an action in the game for your character. Okay, so it's pretty much all those games going back to like the very early games that Scott Adams made, on the Ataris and stuff like that, like Adventureland. A lot of people were making games on the Quill and Paw and stuff like that when that came out on the Spectrum and other machines. So it's aimed at people that are still doing that sort of thing, really. I probably missed the boat by about 30, 40 years, but what can you do? Anyway, right, let's have a look. So I've tried to take people through. It's awkward because I've got a tripod, I'm just sort of reaching around. So it's going from just thinking up ideas, first of all, like what ideas, what sort of games. There's treasure hunts where you just go around collecting treasure and taking it back to a central room or place. Escape, that's where you're locked in a prison or a dungeon, you've got to get out. Or you could even be on a spaceship that's stricken, you need to sort of get out, you've got a certain time limit, or a boat that's sinking. It's one of those where you need to just use your ingenuity just to get out of a place and safety. Fetch find, that's pretty much like Lord of the Rings, where you've got to go and get something and take it to a place. There's that whodunit games. There's a lot of things like police detective games as well, where you're trying to find a murderer or something like that. These are just ideas. I mean, there's probably other things you could do as well, but it just gives you some ideas on the sort of thing that you can do in these games, just to throw some ideas out there. some nice illustrations. Um, and then it talks about designing the gaming world. So this to me is really important to a narrative because the narrative is the most important part of an adventure game, I think. You've got to set the player in a story and in a world that's believable and that they can imagine because all their actions are going to be based on where they are. So, is it in the past? Is it in the future? There's politics involved. Let's say an example would be medieval world. Okay, so it's probably if you're setting it in an idealistic world, it's probably going to be quite boring. So you need some sort of conflict going on in the background. So that could be, a simple thing like you're at war, the country's at war with somebody else, and there might be mixed loyalties in the places that you travel. So you've got to be careful of what you say. People might react to you differently depending on your alliances and that sort of thing. It's also about the world building in general, though. So there's things like, people tend to just sort of make a map and say, oh, this is the town, right? There's some mountains, there's a river, there's some other mountains. What you need to think about, though, is you've got a town. What's going to be the main purpose of the town? Is it a trading town? Is it a farming town? It's got to be sort of like that. So where do they get the food from is an obvious one, and water. And where is that? And how does it get into town? So you might be right next to the river. That's where the water comes from. There could be farmers' fields. Maybe there's carts. Maybe it's a town. That's not rural, and maybe you need to think about that and where the food comes from. So it might be brought in on carts, and it could be that would mean there's a marketplace where people sell the food. And then so suddenly you see the world map starting to expand a little bit. Who makes the food? Does it come in as bags of flour? Does that mean there's a baker's? It's things like that you need to think of. It's just the social impact of everything in the game. And things like weather and stuff like that as well. Is it a warmer climate? That would affect how people live. Colder, obvious dangers. Normally to get a town, there won't be many dangers nearby. It would have been wiped out a long time ago. But you need to think about things like that. Okay, so let's have a look. There's some items. So making a rough map, that's your first thing you would always do in an adventure game. And that would be something as simple as just, like I said, just like a little, here's a town, here's some woods. Right, so where is the town? I said about the water before, so it might be near a river. It probably is going to be near a river, but right next to it would be a bit impractical because it might flood. So there might be a slope leading down to the river. And that would make sense as well because it means that any wildlife coming through that might be a little bit sort of dangerous, that they'll be able to drink from the river without getting anywhere near the town folk. Could be a swamp because there's a river, could be muddy around there, things like that. It talks about different types of puzzle as well. So once you've got your world sorted out, you need to think about the type of puzzles. And the easy ones are things like, you find a key, there's a locked door, you can go and open the door with the key. That's like your bread and butter sort of puzzle. I'd be surprised if there wasn't an adventure game without that in. And it's handy to have these sort of easy puzzles in the game to start with because it draws you in. If you find yourself in an adventure game and you can't go anywhere, A, you've just spent some money on it probably and you're going to be a bit upset, and B, it just gives you a sense of sort of achievement, doesn't it? So I always sort of add harder puzzles as I go, really, so the player can explore a little bit. And you could make things a little bit more complicated. So, okay, you've got a key, you've got a lock, right, you can open it. When you try, though, maybe it's rusty. Okay, so another side quest would be finding something to oil the door. Obviously, oil is, that's the most obvious one. But what you need to think about is things that can be used for common tasks that you wouldn't really immediately think of. So, butter would be a good substitute for oil. Fat in the bottom of a pan or something like that. Grease in general, you could get grease from a cart wheel, something like that. Things like that. These are all things that you need to think about. I've got a list of things here, look, actually. So there's things like you need salt, So I don't know if you can say that. You need salt, so you cook, you heat water, salt water, and then once it evaporates, you've got the salt at the bottom. You've got milk cow. Obviously, you get milk from a cow. You can burn wood to get ash, and you can use ash for all sorts of different things. Um, Even things like ropes. So you got a rope. I mean, you climb things, but what else can be used as a rope? I mean, things like you could be tying blankets together, sheets together to make a rope, a sort of rope, a vine. You can make a ladder out of something by cutting a small tree down and leaning it against a wall. Things like that. How to use NPCs. So that's a non-player character. They could be as simple as just standing around, and then when you talk to them, they say something that gives you a clue. Or there could be a guard that you need to get past. So he could just be standing there blocking. Let's say you can't fight him, maybe giving him food or befriending him, or things like that. If it's a bear or something like that, or a tiger, you could feed it something. Throw some meat at it. These are all different types of things that you might encounter and put into your games, all the way up to an actor one, which is basically a very, I was going to say advanced AI, but it's not really. But it just walks about and reacts to things that you do. So it's like a pretend. It is actually a character and not just a prop, a stage prop. And some are just there for decoration. So you've got like an example here of a barman that just talks to you. If you're in a bar, it'll just sort of scratch his nose, bring up chit chat. These are all different types of things. There's other things you need to consider as well. So one thing that I always got a bit frustrated with in adventure games is, again, about the narrative. You've got to keep the narrative, and you've got to sort of set the player up so that they're not faffing about, as I call it, before the game starts. Okay, so how to streamline the design. This is a good example of it, right? So let's imagine. I'm not going to use this example, but let's imagine a king says to you, right, okay, I need you to go on a quest, right? And it's urgent, and you say, yes, okay. So off you go. And the first thing that happens is that you check your inventory and you haven't got any useful items, which would be completely unrealistic. It's a really sort of dangerous mission. It's urgent. He would say to you, look, here's some stuff. Here's a sword. Here's some food. A tent maybe, and then. The number of games I've played where that happens, you're in a courtroom, a throne room, sorry, and then, you get given the quest, and then everybody just sort of freezes because they've stopped talking, and then you check and you've got nothing in your pockets, and then you've got to spend ages walking around the castle, finding things that should be given to you, and it just ruins the sense of immersion that you should have in adventure games. So having a few items that are useful at the start of the game is really, really important. Conversely as well, right? So if you're a character that's stuck in a prison, you're not going to have much in your pockets at all. The number of games I've played where it's the opposite. You're actually in a prison, and you check your pockets. You've got a key or something, or a load of money. That'll be taken off you. The games where you sort of got some money in your pocket, you can bribe the prison guard, and that's your first solution sorted out. It's unrealistic. So these are all things. Anyway, I've done a example design, okay, and it takes you through making up a story. So I'm terrible on the cameras. So you make up a story, you design a map of the entire world, and then you break that down. I'll just show you that. You break it down into component parts. So you think about the town. So I've got a little town there, look, and I've decided that, there's a beekeeper because you need bees, there's a baker's shop. So we've got honey, we've got flour. There's a thing going down to the river. Because it's a small adventure, I've got the excuse that a lot of the village has actually been burnt down. Just as a sort of a plausible way to, it's been attacked, people have been kidnapped, so that's a plausible way to keep your adventure small. And I would always sort of keep your adventure small to begin with anyway, and then just add to it as you get more experienced. And then that takes you down to the river, and then you need to get across the river at some point, but there's piranhas in it, so you need to get through that. I set up a few red herrings for later in the game as well. So there's a naughty sorcerer type person who's in a castle, is stalling all the townspeople. And I've dropped hints all the way through, including like a book you can find that says, or hints that he's a vampire, and you can find all these anti-vampire stuff like silver and stuff like that all over the place, and it turns out to be a red herring. So if you try to kill him with any of that stuff, you get a nasty surprise at the end. So these are things you need to think about as well when you're designing a game, because it's got to be fun to play, and you've got to have that wow factor at the end. So if you just turn up and kill him with a sword, it's a bit boring, you know. So it takes you through different parts of it. It also tells you that, so I sort of designed it in my head, and then I made a workthrough, what's called a workthrough or a walkthrough. And this is where you write down what the puzzles are and where the player should go. Pretty much like a solution to a game, but your own game. And that when you're writing that down, this is where you start to find out all the different problems that you're going to get, like logic problems. So one of mine was that I've got a woodsman who's, you know, he's you, basically, you're the woodsman. And he's got an axe, because that's what woods people do, to cut down trees and stuff like that. And then as I was, making the game, I sort of realised that, wait a minute, there's a load of things that are made of wood in this game, and the character, the player playing it, he's going to have a great time, and he's just going to be going around trying to smash everything up with his axe. So I was thinking, right, okay, I'll change it then to something else. But I needed that guy to be in the woods out of the way when the town got attacked, because, it was a plausible way to him not to get kidnapped as well. And I thought, right, well, we'll make him something else then. But everyone I could think of that would be in the woods would have some sort of tool that would be inconvenient for the game design. So, an archer, someone that's an hunter for the village, he'd have, a bow and arrow, knives. People that make charcoal, they'll have tools as well. Even if you're just going out there collecting herbs or something like that, you're going to have a tool of some type, and then you're going to be able to use it on various things. So I just had to sort of find a way to solve that problem where you sort of let him use the axe, but in a way that doesn't inconvenience the game design. Okay, so that was one thing, and then there's the thing at the end where you attack the wizard, ooze, or the sorcerer, and he's got some spells, so you need to be able to avoid the spells somehow. Right, so that's how you get through the initial game design. So the next bit is about creating data, and that's where you start making the map properly. So you've got your rough maps, and then you've got, if you can see that, you've got your flowcharts based on that. You need to start making proper documents at this stage, because it has to be clear for yourself, and you number them and you name them so you know where things are. And this allows you to start sorting the data out. So you've got your descriptions, a really basic description. You've got your links to each location, your exit points, and this is where you start to actually build it into an actual game. Okay, so this just talks you through doing all that based on your rough maps. And then what we do is we start actually writing all the data out. So we've got things like, all the things in the book, by the way, you can download from the website. So you start writing location descriptions, and there's an art to this. So this is an important part of adventure writing. So what you need to do with location descriptions is you've got to be descriptive enough to give it atmosphere, but you can't mention things willy-nilly, because when the minute you mention anything, it becomes something real in the game. So it's all right saying, oh yeah, sunlight filters through a window in the roof. Now you've got a window in the roof, and the player's going to try to get up there, and if he's got a ladder, there's no reason why he can't. So you need to think about everything you say, and you've got to plan for it. You could just get, on that example, you could just sort of make an excuse as to why you can't get up there. So the ladder doesn't quite reach the skylight. Things like that. You can get round things, but it's best to just not make life difficult for yourself where you can. So that's a little bit of... So there's some data there as well that tells you, by descriptions of this game. It's just an example game, basically. And then you've got your items as well. So again, it's you've got to be able to create a narrative. So when you examine your items, it might give you a clue. Okay, so I don't know, maybe you've got a blunt axe, it's not working. When you examine it, you find out it's blunt. You've got to find a bit of sandstone to sharpen it. Things like that. So here's how you create your data as well. Just write it all out. Search and examine, that's a really big part of any adventure game as well. So this takes you through what you would do there. And it's, again, what I've done is I've got the location description. Look, and I've sort of greyed out all the bits of the location description that aren't important, but I've highlighted all the bits that are now a thing. So you are in your dirt, emphasised, floored yard, okay, behind your shack. That's where you live. There's a wood pile and stacked against the wall of your dwelling, next to a small doorway to the south. Okay, so these are all these words are key words, and those are words that a player's going to say. Right, well, examine dirt, examine yard, search dirt, search wood pile. There's a gap, examine the gap. These are key words you need to isolate from your text and turn into data so that they can actually examine them. Nothing worse than having an item in a game, even one that you can't pick up, and it says, you say, oh, you're standing on a thick carpet, and you say examine carpet, and it says, I don't know what a carpet is. It's just shoddy, that sort of thing. It's sloppy. So this takes you through all the data creation, and it tells you how to put all the exits in as well. So you've got like all your links in each location. That can change, by the way, obviously. So if you suddenly open a locked door to the east, you can suddenly walk east. So that will change. You'll change that in your code. And I'm not telling you how to program this, by the way, because I don't know what you're going to be using. So I'm trying to make it as sort of open as possible. But the data will always be very similar, depending on what you're writing. Your data will always be pretty much what I'm giving you here. And hopefully this is the sort of thing you can transplant straight into something like the Quill or Adventure On or something like that. Help as well. So there's a good thing about the how to use help properly. Okay, so in every location you should be able to have a unique help. So when they say help, and let's say you're next to a locked door, you'll say something like, well, obviously you need to open the door, don't you? There's different ways of doing that. You can either be very specific and just tell them, open the door, unlock the door, or you could be a bit more cryptic and say, maybe there's an exit that's right in front of you that you're not seeing, or something like that. I've got an example here of there's a pit, okay, and when you examine the pit, it says there's a glint of light at the bottom. Okay, so you can't see what it is. It could be spikes, it could be gold, it could be anything, right? But you can't see it. You've got to actually jump into the pit, which means you're going to have to take a chance, right? My help would be there, all that glitters, ... because that, if you know the saying, all that glitters is not gold. So I'm hinting that it isn't gold, and you're going to die if you jump into the pit, because it is full of spikes, okay? And then you complete the data, that's spell checking and stuff like that, check the data layout. So essentially what you're going to be doing is you're getting all the data together in your game design and a walkthrough for the programmer. It could be you that's coding the game, it might not be. But what you need to do as the designer is get all the data ready, and then someone can just transplant that into an actual working code engine. Okay, I've not talked about the coding because it's not about the coding, but it just tells you a few ways to, there's a few gaming engines there that you can use. And there's a little bit about the effective parser, so that's having as many words as possible for everything. So jump, climb, up, enter, things like that. Let's have a look. So oil, lubricate, those are two words that mean the same sort of thing. It's basically you need to go through a thesaurus, and here we go, look. Climb, mount, ascend, scale. Kill, attack, strike, chop, maim, stab. These are all sort of common words for the same thing. Push, shove, thrust, propel, force. Making it as easy as possible for the player to win. That's the main thing. You don't want it to be too cryptic, but if they can do something, let them do it. And make them do it as easy as they can using the words that you've got. It's just about user friendliness, basically. obviously you can make your puzzles cryptic as you like, you know, but so long as they're understandable and sort of logical, people won't complain about it. And then it talks about playtesting and some golden rules. So there's little things like make sure the objectives are absolutely clear. Don't just give them, you know, they go into a game and they've no idea what they're going to do, or find themselves halfway through, no idea what's next. They don't why they're stuck. They need to know why they're stuck, basically, or what to do next. Keep the presentation nice. Puzzles again start with something easy, you know, build your way up. Don't have things like bodily functions like bite lip, open eyes, close eyes, hold breath, breathe, things like that. These just drive people mad. Random mazes, don't have them in there. Examine, search everything, allow them to do that, and keep the narrative going as well. So try your best to not be in a situation where the computer says, I don't know how to do that, or we can't do that, I don't understand. Always sort of say, you know, if you go north and you can't go north, let the computer say, you can't go north, maybe you want to go south or east instead, is that what you meant? Right? And finally, my last golden tip would be to avoid eating and drinking in the games, unless it's a Tamagotchi game or something like that. What I would say though is there are some times where, or some situations where you would put that in. So let's say you start off in a desert and you've got so many turns before the character dies, he's got to find water or something like that, or she's got to find water. That's fine. I mean, but it's one of these games where you're constantly nannying the characters, you know, so you're always, you know, they're always saying they're hungry or thirsty or tired and that sort of thing, and you're always checking how tired they are, and that's not fun, you know, that's babysitting. Just avoid that. Anyway, so, like I say, it's not about programming. It mentions coding and stuff like that a little bit in the data, but it's not about coding, it's just about the design. But this is available from Amazon. Kindle version is $2.99 and the full book is $8.99. Some reasons it's selling really well, but if you're interested in writing these sorts of games, honestly, I mean, I know I wrote it, right? I know, but it is well worth getting just because I think I know what I'm talking about. Oh, one thing I didn't mention. Now, I do say at the start, I mean, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? So I'm not saying that I'm an expert, complete expert in writing adventure games or designing adventure games, right? So to get a bit of balance, what I've done is I've added some hints and tips from really, really famous designers. I mean, Scott Adams, you know, Adventure International, he's a legend. He wrote the first ever home adventure games as well. He wrote things like The Hulk, Adventureland, loads and loads of games. He's well famous. Phil South, he was co-designer on a game called Fish, and he's reviewed a few games himself, so obviously he knows his way around adventure games. So he gives his two penneth. Trevor Hall wrote Twin Kingdom Valley as well. Excellent game. It's a massive title. He talks about world design and that sort of thing. Terry Greer, that was involved with Heroes of Khan and loads of other games. He's actually a professor now as well at... No, sorry, he's not. He's a senior lecturer in game design at Falmouth University in the UK. And he talks about planning and stuff like that as well. Right? Fergus McNeil, Lord of the Rings. Delta 4. He's chips in as well with some instant tips. And Scott Denyer, who was head of Delbert the Hamster, well-known computer games company back in the day, indie firm. And of course we've got Mark Cantrell as well, who's excellent. He wrote some of the best adventure games, really technically brilliant as well. You know, it was well ahead of its time, his games. NPCs that could do loads of things. It was amazing. He wrote 3 or 4 books that were all gradually better and better and better. Probably the best developer of indie games back then. And yeah, that's it. Well, anyway, check it out on Amazon. There's a few of my other games, books about games, I should say, some of my guidebooks and stuff like that, Spectrum game guidebooks, adventure game guidebooks. Right, fill your books, guys. Thank you very much.